tell you just probably make 3 comments in this regard. First one is, Massachusetts people think they're really smart. Probably too smart. There's that thing called Harvard and all that sort of stuff. We're the smartest people in the room all the time. And I apologize if any of our Massachusetts folks come across that way too. I'm joking, but when we developed our standards, we didn't stick to Massachusetts people. We went to Stanford and Jim Milgram. We went to folks, yes, at Harvard. We went to folks at the University of Michigan. We tried to get the very best in the country. And then we went and looked at international standards. And we said, what are people doing in other countries? And I would urge you to think broadly. There are 2 things education needs to do. And I don't at all poo-poo this whole idea that we have to be internationally competitive. We do. Absolutely do. And that means looking at what other countries are doing. But there's also a part of it which is definitely state-oriented and should be state-led, which is what kind of citizens do we want to have? On that one, you shouldn't listen to me at all. But in terms of what kids need to know in order to be internationally competitive, I think we have pretty good expertise on that. First point. And I'd say that Massachusetts, in developing its standards, did exactly that. When we developed our U.S. history standards, we looked at certainly some of the broad strokes of what had to be in there, but we also added in things like this. A lot of progressive era history, because Massachusetts is rich in progressive era history. We wanted to make sure that kids went to visit the Lowell Mills, where some of the early unions were started, right? Those are things that belong to Massachusetts. They don't belong in your U.S. history standards, right? You've got your own history in that regard. And in creating this soul of the kid, cultivating that kid is something that is quintessentially much more local. But on what math and what English language art standards people are using around, you've got to use your judgment. I've said over and over, you should not adopt Massachusetts standards. But you do better. Create your own stuff, but look at what's really good there. That's the first point. Second point is, I'm not coming to you imposing anything. I'm not saying you should adopt my program. I'm not saying, here's federal funding. I'm giving you advice that's worth what you paid for, which is 0. Right? What I'm trying to present to you are facts. And I think you're smart. And everyone here, I appreciate the time you're putting into this. You will have to weigh those things. I can't make those judgments for you. The final thing I would say is this. To those people who say, outside experts are coming in, don't listen to any of them, we don't live in that world anymore. So I would disagree with them.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much for your testimony today and the perspective you bring to this. I have a couple of really specific questions about the language of the bill. I think you've addressed a lot of the larger questions, but one of the provisions of the bill would prohibit the state of Ohio from adopting Common Core state standards or any similar standards or protocols. And that word similar is very troubling to me. It feels very loose. I think if you look at our previous standards side by side with Common Core state standards, they would both speak to phonemic awareness and using phonics instruction. And I asked this question last night as well, but how would you approach that to avoid a state standard that is Common Core without prohibiting us from using what has really been a large effort across the country to develop standards, many of which would have a lot of similarities?
Right, and remember the question from last night and Sandy Stotsky's response to it. It's a difficult one. As a non-lawyer, I think I'd probably have difficulty finding exactly the right word. I understand your concern. There are some similarities. I think there are maybe a couple of ways around this. The first one is, I believe one of the core things you have to do, at least on your math side, is to ensure that in the bill you're saying that you'll get to Algebra 1 by 8th grade, and that the pathways to getting there will be clear and explicit. This gets to a point that Jim Milgram was making yesterday, which is that, look, Common Core has some pretty cool things in it in 4th grade math and different grades. One of the things that's really troubling about it when I look at it is, there's a really cool thing here, and then the next year it's kind of left to the side and it's not developed. It's sort of a document, it is a document, not sort of. It is a document that was crafted by committee. So a lot of stuff gets stuffed in there in terms of we want buy-in from folks who are participating there. So I think you should have some clear markers about things you absolutely feel are essential to making sure you have truly world-class standards. And the first one, again, is be explicit. Algebra 1 needs to at least be in 8th grade. And a clear and explicit pathway for getting there should be there. Okay? Second thing I would urge you to do is to think long and hard about a second question that you asked yesterday, Representative, which was about the 50-50 split in literature, non-literary texts. I think there should be some real thought about how you want to craft your goals for that. And I think that's one we could talk about. It's a longer conversation, but it's something that is well worth thinking about being explicit about as well. So there are very specific things that would allow you to use the word similar, but then be more specific about the dissimilarities that you're looking for. That would give you, I think, a good, clear path and would provide good guidance to those who will end up working on the standards. And I hope that's